Pot in My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pot in My Noggin. I'm your host, CK Sims, and today we have sort of an elusive guest, maybe. And her name is Lisa Sugarman. She comes from Boston, Massachusetts, and she has really good sort of message for everyone. A lot of life experience and a lot of really cool things that you've done. So, Lisa, welcome
Thank you.
to the show. Thanks for being a guest. I think when we first connected on the platform and you kind of shared a bit of your story, the part that really stood out to me was surrounding your dad.
Yeah.
Right? And that you had to learn your dad's life.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if you feel comfortable with starting there. Like,
Yeah.
you're 10 years old.
Yeah. I'm 10 years old and I'm losing my dad, who's my best friend in the world and my person. And I was an only child, so he was everything. And I came home from summer camp one day. I went to day camp, half an hour away, and I got off the bus and my mother met me the way she always met me. And instead of walking me to our house, she walked me kind of the opposite way down to the end of the street. And I don't know what it was. There was something bizarre about that to me, not in the way she was behaving or in the way she was talking. But it didn't make sense to me for some reason that my dad wasn't there. And I don't even know why, because my dad probably wouldn't have normally been there. My dad worked in the city and we lived in the suburbs. And that wasn't a time of day that he would normally be home. It was just some bizarre little instinct. And I immediately said, "Where's Dad?" And she said, "He had a heart attack." And, your first instinct when you hear that is, "Oh my God, I have to go to him. Where is he? We have to go to him right now." And by the time we had gotten to that part of the conversation, she had walked me down the street. My aunt's car was parked at the end of our street, and we were sitting in it now. And I looked at her and I said, "We need to go to him." And she said, "Yeah, he's gone." And she told me in that moment that he had had a heart attack. And so my dad was a heavy smoker. My dad was, it's crazy. It's like such a dichotomy because my dad was so fit. He was a mountaineer. He raced cars. He was an avid tennis player. He was like super fit. And yet he smoked like 3 packs of Marlboro Reds a day. So my 10-year-old little brain didn't have to reach very far for that narrative to be true. My dad was a smoker. He had a heart attack and died. So that's how I lost my dad the first time. And that was the story that I lived with my entire life, all the way through young adulthood, all the way through getting married, having my own kids. And then my father died when he was 45. So ironically, when I was 45, I found out totally by accident that my dad had not died from a heart attack. My dad had actually taken his own life. And it just shattered me to 1,000 pieces.
So I have to ask, right? And you say by accident. Can you talk about, how that happened?
Yeah. I feel comfortable. There's no part of my story that I'm not comfortable talking about. So, I say this whenever anyone asks me that question, I prepare them and say it was not like some crazy dramatic revelation. It wasn't that kind of a thing. And my husband and I live in a really small town north of Boston. And it's basically like an island. It's a peninsula. So everybody knows everybody, and you're always seeing people My husband and I were having lunch at a cafe outside. It was in the summertime, and my cousin walked by, who was from Marblehead, which is where I'm from, Marblehead, Mass. And she didn't live in town all year round, so I hadn't seen her for a while. And we're just catching up. Her kids are a little older than my kids, so she sits down, and we're just chatting and filling each other in. And out of nowhere, she starts, asking about my kids, which was not... That wasn't the out of nowhere part. It was the question she asked after she asked, how are they doing? What are they up to? And then out of nowhere, she asked if my daughters, who at the time were 15 and 13, asked if my kids had any of the same mental illness and depression that my dad had. And I had no idea what the hell she was talking about. Just was not something that I was aware of. It was not something that was ever seen or acknowledged or discussed or present in any way in my family, in my childhood. And it just, it's one of those things that you hear and you almost can't react because it's such a bizarre and unexpected thing that you're like, what prompted that? Where did that come from? But in that moment, I think I was a little too surprised to even ask her about it. So I really just kind of let it go. And my mom and I are super, super close. I'm very lucky to have a great relationship with her. We talk every day. And she happened to be around shortly after that. And let me just say that I never suspected anything after that conversation with my cousin. Never. It's not like all of a sudden my headspace changed and I was like, wait a minute, something happened, something's wrong, something doesn't line up. Like, I did not have any of those thoughts or feelings. But I did bring it up to my mom in a different way the next time I talked to her. I didn't know it was on my mind. We were just sitting having lunch. And out of nowhere, I asked her if my father had been depressed. And she said yes. And I knew, so you have to understand my family dynamic. I come from parents with two radically different families. My father's side of the family was very tough, like very money oriented. They had a family business. There was real estate business. They were fairly affluent. Everything revolved around this family business. And my father busted his ass to help manage that business after my grandfather passed away. So my father had a full-time job working in the city. And then he also had a full-time job working for his family, managing all of this real estate. And nothing my poor father ever did was good. Nothing. Every building was full. Everybody was happy. Everything was as profitable as it had ever been. And yet it was never enough for my father's side of the family. My mom's side of the family is just every ounce of joy that can be found in is my mom's side of the family. Just warm and loving and supportive and emotional, all the things. So they pretty heavily compensated for the lack of that on my dad's side. So I did understand when my mom said he was depressed, I got it. Like, I understand why that might have been. Before I even knew I was asking the question, the next thing out of my mouth was, did Dad take his life? I didn't have any intention of asking that. I had never thought that thought before it was coming out. So somehow, some way.
And after he was depressed, she said yes, but you proceeded to ask if he choked his wife.
I did. That's right. And she immediately, without any hesitation, said no. She said yes, he did. And then, of course, that was the day he died again. That was the day that wound, that deep trauma just reignited all over again. And it was so different. Like, I was 10 and now I was 45. I was a child. Now I was a mom. I had 2 teenage kids in high school. I had been married at that time for 20 years. And this man who was my dad was a hero. My dad was, you ever hear that expression, cool like the other side of the pillow?
I haven't, but I like it.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I think it was like some baseball commentator used it years ago. And that was my dad. He was just cool like the other side of the pillow. He just had this way about him, this charm about him, this beautiful personality. And so nobody, including my mom, had any idea that anything was really going on under the surface. Like, she knew he had stress from, his family, from working so much. But beyond that, there were no signs. And that's what made the whole thing so hard.
And the high, which you mentioned as well on your website, is that 35 years ago.
Nobody who's talking about suicide.
Did not talk about it.
No,
you didn't talk. No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
No mental health. Who's talking about mental health in 1968 or 1978? I mean, they weren't. So my dad actually, it's a really sad irony is that apparently, maybe a month or so before he passed away, he told my mother that, he had been very stressed and he decided to go see a therapist. And he saw this therapist she thinks he probably saw this person maybe 2 or 3 times. And it was obviously too little, too late. He just
you're at a table in a restaurant with your mother. You asked her this question and she responds. What's the immediate reaction from both of you, really? She's just now released a secret that she's been holding on to for 35 years, and you're just now being secondary traumatized. Really,
Yeah.
if you think about it, like that wound was just ripped wide open.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I was like hemorrhaging trauma at that point in that moment. So, I mean, you have to remember that, obviously 35-year difference in those moments, but I felt like a 10-year-old child again. I mean, I like that. Look, anybody who's ever lost anybody, especially a parent or a sibling or like a close family member, like, that trauma, that pain. It's like, how we have muscle memory in the gym, we have that emotional muscle memory as well. And I mean, I think at the time when the way this all went down, just kind of like the choreography of the way this all went down, is that we were sitting in a cafe. And by the time I was asking her the question, we were actually walking out the door. We had finished and we were just chatting. And I asked her about him being depressed, and she said yes. And that was kind of in that moment that we were like kind of heading toward the car. So if I remember correctly, it's like 10, almost 11 years ago that conversation happened. We were walking out to the car. So we were like in the middle of this big public parking lot. And my mother acknowledged it and said, yes, that was what happened. So now we're like getting into my car. And I think we sat in my car, had to have been at least an hour. If it was a minute, it was at least an hour. You know what I mean? And just sobbing. Like, I think I was just in absolute shock. I had never been more shocked by anything in my life, not even the death of my father. I was older, so I have different capacity to process and my full mature brain. So, where my head went was just to a place of complete disbelief. And, I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure? And then, of course, I think somehow we ended up talking about the note that he had left, because I asked, at that point, then all you need is information, details. I needed to know, like, what the hell actually happened. And she started at the beginning and the best she could, and she told me. And the one thing, though, that I do remember so vividly, and I feel exactly the same way today that I did the day that I found out, and I have felt this way every day since. I have never, since the second she told me, ever had a second of resentment or anger, distrust of my mother. Like, I got it. In that moment, like, I was a mom. I had 2 young kids and a husband at home. I 1000% understood why my mom changed that story in that moment. It was 1978. He was my best friend in the world. He was there, then he was gone. And the last thing in the world my mother was going to do was to drop a suicide on top of him already being gone, and what that would have done to me. So she was already like, her childhood has now changed forever. I can't change it.
It's an interesting how you said that, because I know in my mind I was wondering, what your feelings around her holding that. But I agree with what you're saying. Like, as a mother, and not even to mention someone who experiencing, there are always trauma and loss and grief in that moment.
Yeah.
A decision had to be made.
Yeah.
And she made the decision. And I don't think it's relevant whether it was the right or wrong decision, period. I think it was the decision that she made to ensure her survival and the survival of her family.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, it was a day. It was a day. And then, of course I had to take her home and she was staying with us at the time. So I kind of, brought her home, because just the emotion of all of it was just so completely overwhelming. It was so unexpected for both of us that would ever come out. She had resigned herself to never telling me. I mean, she had intended to at different points kind of along my childhood and adulthood. But then it was always like, well, this isn't the right time. She's about to go to high school and go to college and get married and have kids. So it was almost became like a non-issue. It was like, he's gone. It certainly isn't going to impact the fact that he's gone. Even 10 years ago, we weren't having the conversations that we're having now about mental illness and mental health and wellness and the DNA factor that plays such a big role in this generational type of mental illness and things like that. So she wasn't thinking what I was thinking, which was, well, I need to tell my daughters. Like, my daughters I didn't tell them for the first few years, because I was so completely blown up inside by this whole revelation. that I didn't tell a soul. The only people who knew were my husband and my mom. And my mother had never told a living soul. So,
Wow.
yeah. So I kept that, and I talk about this part of it a lot, that I was two very different people. I was two distinctly different people living in the same, body and world for 3 years before I started talking about it, because I was, I was a mom, I was working, I had my friends, I was doing my thing. And, I was just trying to kind of navigate it and deal with it on my own. And my poor husband, like, he deserves more credit than anybody could ever receive for holding space for me the way that he did and the way that he has. I mean, I cried myself to sleep with him, I think, every night for 3 years, and my kids have no idea. And then finally I got to that point where I was like, well, I really feel like I need to tell them now. They're old enough, they can understand it, they can process it. This is part of their DNA too. And this DNA could, things skip generations. You never know how something's going to show up in someone else. So they need to know, because if anything starts to show up in either one of them, they have to understand that, there's a root cause for this. And we need to have an open line of communication. They need to either be able to talk to each other, talk to us, ask about a therapist, whatever it was. And so we did. And that was the tipping point for me. When I told my kids, and when I started talking about it to like family and extended friends, then that was it. It became kind of like a, the snowball that you let go at the top of the hill, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I don't mean bigger and bigger in a bad way. I mean bigger and bigger. Like, I think my commitment to sharing the story, every time I shared it, it just infused me with, more motivation to keep sharing it. People would be impacted in such radically different ways. Like, I'd have people who had made attempts who would resonate with it, and people who, knew someone who had taken their life. And so, like, there were all these different angles, and just grief and loss in general, and suicide grief and loss is so nuanced. And yeah, so I just kind of, I guess I just dove right in.
It's such an uncomfortable topic for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's something that people tend to shy away from just because it's so, feels so heavy.
It is.
And it is heavy, without question. The way you lighten a burden is you share a burden, right?
Yeah.
So the more hands, the lighter the load, however you want to say that. And when it comes to you telling your story, I think it's important. And as you mentioned, you just never know the impact you're going to have on even one single person.
Right.
And that completely changed the very framework of their life. Because you spoke up about your experiences with loss of suicide.
Right.
Now, you had 2 other experiences with loss to suicide.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about both?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and I actually, ironically, there's another one that I've never really talked about that really just kind of came to light recently. And this was no one that I knew personally, but this was a family member, my great-grandfather, my father's grandfather. And I just learned about that within the last 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So you talk about that kind of, generational mental illness. The other two that were a lot more impactful in my life, I lost a cousin 1 year before my father died. So it was my first experience, not only with losing a family member, like, he was my first cousin. He lived up the street from me. We were always together. He was, I was 9, he was 18. So there was not a lot of interaction in that way. And he was an 18-year-old boy, does not want to hang out with his 9-year-old, girl cousin. But he had been, dealing with his own demons and mental illness for a very long time. And he passed away very, very suddenly. And it was the first experience that I had had with suicide and with death in the family. And my mom and dad were really open about it, as much as you can be open to a 9-year-old child about it. Like, they did explain that, like, his brain didn't work like everyone else's brain. His brain was sick, that kind of language. And, I kind of knew the basic details. Again, it was, that's the thing about suicide. Like, it depends on how someone chooses to take their life. It can just add to the trauma in such incredible ways, depending on how that shakes out. Yeah. And in my cousin's case, it was very bad. So I didn't know the details about that until I was much older. But following year, my father passed away, but again, without a heart attack. So now that's my second experience in 2 years losing someone in my family. And then I ended up finding out, obviously, we've talked about this, that 35 years later, I find out the truth. 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, one of my husband and myself, one of our best childhood friends that we from the time I was 5 and the time my husband was 16, we've all been close. We lived together at one point. It was in our wedding. Our daughter was a flower girl, that kind of connection. Lifelong friends. He took his life out of nowhere. Yeah, it wrecks you. There's no other way to say it. It just absolutely wrecks you. And it doesn't matter how many times you've been through something like that before. Every loss is its own unique thing that you have to navigate. And, his was a tough one too. The way in which he took his life was a very difficult situation. So, that just added to the pain and the trauma of all of it. But yeah, so I have definitely got not a good hat trick in my life. I mean, a hat trick that I wish I did not have.
It's the thing you talked about so far, and even just on lisasugarman.com, you have so many resources on there for people who are at home listening right now, or just head over there. So many resources. It's an incredible website. Losing someone to suicide is so nuanced and so multifaceted, and everyone's going to respond to it differently. Yet, like you just said, probably you are also going to add so many components to it. And I think the one that always stands up in my mind the most is the why, which you rarely get, right? And then also, if there's something you could have done to make a difference, to change the outcome. And for me, I'm on the other side, as I mentioned to you before we started filming, is I've been down the road of darkness, going through the motion, everybody thinking that I'm okay, I got a job, I went out, I did things, I had fun, but there was just hope, just dark, constant for, I think, 3.5 years, just a non-stop wave of hope. And I made an attempt to take my life. I took every measure that I've possibly known to man. And I was thoughtful in the sense that, I wanted to do it in the bathtub, keep the mess contained, all of these things. I don't know how long it's going to take for someone to find me. But I had all of these thoughts, right? I did fail, as I mentioned to you, and I am grateful that I failed. In that time, when you are there, when you're in that, there is a lie. Your whole mind is lying to you, but you don't have hope. There doesn't seem to be anything anyone can do, anything that could happen that could make it better. And for me, and I know for a lot of people who have survived suicide attempt, the most clarity, the most peace they feel is when they actually decide to do it and set the thing into motion. And I remember that almost week when I finally decided to do it with resolve. So I was like, a weight was lifted. I was making the choice, that decision to go on my own terms. And I'll tell you real quick that for years I didn't understand suicide. I made the Pentecostal church said suicide is like an unforgivable sin. And, people think of it as a cowardly way out, and there's so much taboo on it. And then Robin Williams was the one person who really affected me, and I couldn't understand it. I couldn't figure out or grasp how someone who was such light to so many could find themselves in a place where I could not get that, Lisa. I
get it. I get CK. I think it's because mental illness does not discriminate.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't at all. And it wasn't until I got there myself I realized that people who suffer from heavy depression or mental illness are the best actors in the entire world.
For sure. Look at my dad.
Yeah. If there was an Oscar category,
Yeah.
I'm like, honestly, and you just don't know. I just need goosebumps thinking about it because the truth is you just don't know. You can be having a conversation with someone laughing time of your life and the very next day they're gone. And you're like, it works. It's such a, I don't know. And it's, I wanna say, as you wanna say too, I think, that there is hope for those who are suffering. And like, I don't know how to tell people to say no.
Yeah, I know. You know what? I think, well, first of all, I think I think in some way I can understand how you would have been at peace, or anyone who kind of makes that decision that has finally been able to take agency over their life and over this thing that's held you so incapacitated for such a long time, and all of a sudden you rise up and say, nope, I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna save myself. And this is the only way that I can save myself, until you make that decision and you're like, oh, thank God. Now I'm like, it's gonna end pretty soon. Is that accurate?
That was very accurate.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm assuming that that's probably something that goes through us people. So I mean, I work on a crisis lifeline with the Trevor Project, and I talk to a lot of people who have suicidal ideation for decades. And they say that, those who have made attempts say that there is this incredible calm that comes over you when you finally make that decision to follow through, because you know that, okay, I'm in the home stretch, the pain is almost over. You're not thinking about anything else. You're not thinking about anyone else. You're not doing this to leave the people that you love, because you still love them, right?
Yeah.
So I think that what you and I have to keep telling people, and the more we say it, and the more people we can encourage to see it, the more people will start to understand, and the narrative will change. We need to say that when you're in this moment of hopelessness, it's not going to last. There is another side to it. You will not always feel the way that you feel right now. That's, I think, the biggest and most important piece to keep in mind, that it won't always feel this way. It's like grief, right? It's like guys who we love. We cannot possibly imagine functioning and loving again, or feeling joy again, or happiness again. And somehow, I mean, we're still sad that that person's gone, and we still grieve them and miss them, and that will never change. Grief never ends. But somehow we find our way through it. And I think those feelings of hopelessness are similar in that way, where it's like, it's actually okay to sit in them. It's actually important to acknowledge them, talk about them, get help for them, work through them. And also, like, keep in mind, it's not always going to be that way. And that's the thing that we need to just like hammer over and over and over again. And that's what will, I think, be that agent of change within this whole space of mental illness.
I pray. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Life in Stitches by CK Sims. Available for purchase in paperback and ebook on all major platforms. Partner today with CK Sims and Pod and My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others, and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody. Before the break, Lisa Sugarman and I were talking about the importance of talking about suicide. And you were just talking about the fact that oftentimes when someone tries to attempt suicide or leads up to that, once they make that decision, they experience this form of peace, right? And you were correct in what you were saying. And, I think for me, for the world, if I can give any message to them, it would be that I was there. I lived through the darkness, and I really tried super hard to die in the darkness because I didn't think there was going to be another opportunity. Everything like quite, if you just like in, it's so hard to explain, but darkness, hopelessness, point, nothing was there. And so after like 3.5 years, I just decided, we're going to do it. Once again, I failed. Obviously, I'm here, very gratefully. I wasn't happy first, though, right? And when I ended up in a short stay unit for 3 days in a psych ward, and this male practitioner, I can't remember if he was a doctor, nurse, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever, I can't remember who he came in. He just looked at me like a human being, like he was a human being, looking at me as a human being, and he said, "What's going on?" And it was just such a genuineness to him. And I remember just exploding in like just verbal diarrhea, I guess, if you will. Like just everything that could have ever happened in my life, all these things. And the main thing that he caught on, which I think is really important for anybody who's suffering with suicide, is that I kept saying or referencing that I'm just so tired. And I'm tired of trying to stay above water. It just feels point, right? And so I was trying to give myself a break. And all those this. I repeatedly said that. And so he said to me 3 words that changed my life forever. And he looked at me and he said, "Just stop swimming." He says, finding the word. But just stop swimming. And in the moment, I did not know what he was talking about. Until a little bit later in the day, I spoke to a psychiatrist and I learned that it was radical acceptance, right?
Yeah.
And how powerful that is as a tool.
Yes, I
And
talk about that a
so,
lot with my own therapist, actually. We talk
and
about
it's such
acceptance a lot.
a,
Yeah.
and for anybody at home who doesn't understand what radical acceptance is, the whole point of me saying what I just said is that we spend so much of our energy trying not to be depressed, anxious, have mental illness, that we have nothing left for anything else. So when we're all out moving through the emotion, just trying to be normal, appear normal, laugh at jokes, be engaged, go to work, move through the motions, and then we come home at night, we close out all the lights, and shut the curtains, and we flop down exhausted as we have nothing left. That's part of the problem.
Oh, that is fully the problem, because when you really think about it, it's like we're human. We're
Yeah.
fallible. We get wounded. We get angry. We get sad. We get depressed. We get happy. We get all the things. We run the range of all of it, and we're supposed to. So why in the hell are we wasting so much time trying to tamp down all of these emotions that we are supposed to be feeling as humans, because we are wired to feel them? So, okay, let's think about it this way. When you're sad, how about you let yourself be sad? How about you sit in that? If you're angry, if you're frustrated, if you're joyful, if you're whatever you are in that moment, like, how about like be that thing and let yourself do it and then cycle through it?
And for a touch point for people, when you're happy, you do not spend your entire day trying to figure out why you're happy.
Yeah, right.
Right? You're like, oh, I'm happy. Like, let's be happy. So when in that same breath, when you're angry or sad or anxious or whatever you're feeling, just be like, oh, that's sad. Okay. And that was the key tool for me to turn my life around. From being someone who had struggled with mental illness since 13, diagnosed with type 2 bipolar disorder, all of these things, anxiety, whatever. It was the allowing myself to feel, giving myself grace, because you mentioned this under what says, call it what that word is. Allowing yourself grace to feel. If you feel broken, be broken. That's okay. Right?
Yeah.
And one of my biggest things for anybody listening at home was I had a really poor, I'm trying not to swear, crappy self-dialogue. And it was just the most awful thing in the entire world. I would never speak to another human being that. Yet I was so freely doing it to myself. So it took a really long time for me to catch thoughts and cognitively restructure how my brain. And now, 8 years later, which was 35 and 43, I'm a stacky mofo. Just but most of the time, I'm just like a positive guy. Just love people, connecting with people. I like the work that I do. I like my family, my friends. Yeah, I find joy in so much. That was not who I was at 35 or 5. I was never that person. But now I get to live, right? And it felt like I try to always be grateful for every opportunity I have. So,
Well, it's interesting that you said grateful, and in the same way that you said the word grace stuck out to you, the word grateful sticks out to me, because there's an exercise that I do, and I'm not doing it to try and negate the feelings that I'm in. I do it because it's just it's a positive thing for me to do for myself when I'm in a moment where I'm feeling very low and I'm feeling, I wouldn't say hopeless necessarily, but I'm just not myself. I'm not happy. I seek out something that I'm grateful for, because, and try this. If you're listening, try this. You cannot be in a state of gratitude and be upset. Or I challenge you to do it because you can't.
no, I will double down on Lisa's challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So, usually in the morning when I wake up, I will say, typically most mornings, I think I do it on autopilot now. At least 2 or 3 things that I'm grateful for. And then waking up, I spread my hand really wide. I press them down on the mattress, and just to feel very grounded in that moment as I'm saying, I'm very grateful that I get to wake up for another day. I'm grateful that I get to go to work today. I'm grateful for my house. It could be anything. And you look around, you're going to find a lot of things that you're grateful. Yeah, you might be miserable in this moment. You'll find things that
You will. And the interesting thing too, something you just said about saying, you're grateful that you get to get up, or you're grateful that you have a home to live in and a community and friends. There's something else that I try to do as often as I can. And this is super helpful just in terms of like kind of course correcting and attitude. I feel like most often I try to consciously find the positive in a situation. Like, not everybody is dying to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go out for a run, or, dying to go do, make a superset at the gym, or to take the train into work, or whatever it might be, or pull the weeds in your yard all afternoon. But when you reframe something, when you spin something and you say, move my body today, I get to make myself a little bit stronger today. I get to have this quiet time on the train to read my book or my newspaper or send messages to people I love. I get to be in my yard out in nature, pulling out weeds. It's going to make my yard look amazing. I mean, it's all how you position things a lot of the time in our brains. It's like why there's so much rubbernecking traffic, because people are so in awe of bad things that they spend so much time and focus so much energy on the bad things. And instead, if we would just consciously do a little bit of reframing of things, you can pretty much reframe anything and find the good in it. This is not to say that you have to be happy about every little thing that you do that is a slog or annoying. You don't have to be, but there's a way to find joy where you don't think that there is, if you look hard.
more, honestly. And the reframing, are a very powerful tool in changing your entire landscape of your life. And how you see things, how you move through life, how you interact with others, how you interact with yourself. And it's such an important tool. You mentioned this earlier. After you found out about your dad, after you started talking to your saint, what compelled you to and involved with the Trevor Project?
That was a no-brainer for me. So for anyone listening who does not know what the Trevor Project is, Trevor Project is the largest LGBTQ crisis and support hotline on the planet. We're here in the US, we're also here in Mexico. We're 24/7, 365. There are people like me on both lifelines and text lines. We have a texting and a phone platform. And we are there to provide help and support and resources and to hold space for teens and young adults ages 13 to 24. A couple of things really put the Trevor Project on my radar to begin with. So we've been around for 26 years. This is our 26th year, and have helped thousands, hundreds and thousands of people with not just suicidal ideation and, joblessness or relationships or coming out, or, like everything. Anything that you would call a crisis hotline like 9884, that's what you would call the Trevor Project for. It's just geared toward the LGBT. So it came on my radar because my daughter, we have two daughters. My youngest is 24, my oldest just turned 27. And my 27-year-old daughter came out as bi when she was a junior in college. And several years after that, because how insanely brave and beautiful my daughter is, and the encouragement that I got from her without her even knowing she was encouraging me, I came out as pansexual 3 years ago. So I'm married, happily married, been married for 31 years. My husband's my guy. He's my person. I love him to death. It was just a knowing that I had about myself, so I came out. So now all of a sudden I went from being an ally of the queer community to a member of the queer community, a child who's queer, and Trevor Project, obviously, there's that intersection because the LGBTQ community is their focus. And I'm a survivor, I'm a 3-time survivor of suicide loss. And those two things together in the same organization were like, it's a no-brainer for me. This is the place I want to be. And I got to a point where, I was talking about my father's story a lot. I was writing about it. That's what I do. I'm a content creator. I write for a living. I started speaking. I got involved with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I'm a speaker, a storyteller with them, telling my story. I work as a grief group, a suicide loss grief group facilitator with Samaritans. And I just wanted to do more. And so I got trained with Trevor Project. I wanted to be the person on the other end of the phone that gave hope to the person who didn't have any. I wanted, I couldn't save my dad. We couldn't save him. We couldn't save my cousin. We couldn't save my friend Steve. But maybe I could save somebody else. And like you said, it's all about impact. I wear a bracelet. I'm not wearing it at the moment, but I usually have it on every day. And it's a little teeny tiny bracelet that just says impact. And I've had it for a decade. And it's all I want to do in the world. And that's just another way that I get to do that. So I remember my mother saying, my mom was nervous when I first said I wanted to do this because I'm a very, very, very classic empath. I feel everything from everybody. And she was worried. And so with my husband or my daughters, that it could be too much. And the weirdest thing in the world happens to me when I get on that lifeline. I'm just 1,000% there. It's where I want to be. It's where I need to be. It's where I know I belong. And I do the thing that I need to do. And the very first day, my mother was saying, wishing me luck. And all you have to do is say, just help one person, help one person. The very first phone call that I took after I had gone through all my training and had been supervised and everything, my first solo phone call was an imminent risk suicide attempt in process. The call lasted, I think, 3.5 hours. And I was very fortunate to be able to de-escalate that person and create a safety plan for that person and get that person help. And in that moment, I was like, yep, I am doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, exactly what I'm supposed to be. So that's what I do.
Well, these people out here, right?
No, I hope so.
And especially in the LGBTQIA plus community, I threw up the 2S at the beginning, and I'm trying to be politically correct.
Yeah.
But we're just such a marginalized community, especially in the US right now, right? I'm not from the US and it came to that, but to me, there's a border, but I just feel like the US is our neighbor and we share so many similarities. You know what I mean? It's just, yeah. So just in the US right now, trans being under attack, all of it. It's just
Everything's under attack.
everything's under attack. Yes.
Yeah.
They need that. They need that sort of place where they can call and get someone like you who, even if it is, they're in the process of taking their life, but they're just taking that last call, right? That connection, sometimes all someone needs to know that they're not alone and that there's somebody who does care about them. But it goes a long way. You may not fix everything forever, but it goes a long way. And
Right. we're not here as counselors to fix everything. We're not here to fix the problems. We're not here to give you all the answers. We're not here to, put a big giant Band-Aid on and send you off and, have a great day. It's not the design. The design is we want to help reduce the feelings of hopelessness, or reduce the amount that you're cutting, or reduce the negative self-talk, or whatever it is. We want to de-escalate your behaviors so that they are to you. So if you're, for instance, somebody who calls me, and I've had this happen before where someone's cutting, for instance, it's very common. They're cutting, they're self-harming. And what I'm trained to do is to try and encourage you to do that less. So maybe if you're cutting with a knife, maybe I encourage you to put on a thick rubber band and, flick your wrist whenever you would normally cut. And so it's things like that. Like, that's what we're there to do. And it's in doing that we can, hopefully, the goal is to kind of pull someone out of that deep, dark, negative headspace to the point where, like you said earlier, like, we get on this endless loop and we're our own worst enemy. And mental illness can be so incredibly toxic and deceiving. But it's like you're stuck in this place where you're just being fed the same shit over and over and over and over again, and by yourself. So you've got to get some clarity and some distance, and that's what we do. And we'll try and provide the resources and the support, and we hold that space. Because you mentioned something a second ago, and I thought it was really important to throw out a statistic. You talked about like how valuable it is to have someone listen, and how impactful that can be, and how much that can change the outcome for someone. Did you know that in the case of LGBTQ youth, teens in particular, just having one single human being listen to you when you're in distress will reduce the risk of suicide by 40% in that human being? Like, that's insane. Just that, that's such a staggering statistic that it's like, there's your proof that community equals support. And the more we can tap into our communities and our support systems, the better off we're going to be, because then that kind of gets us out of our own head. The more we can just talk to someone. You don't have to find someone who's going to solve a problem or even have a lot to say in return. Just let someone hear what's going on inside your head. Hear yourself say it to someone, because oftentimes what we're saying up here is very different than what we're speaking. And once we hear ourselves say it, we're like, oh boy, okay.
That's the beauty of therapy, right? I've had lots of therapy in my life. I'm a huge proponent for therapy. Get it if you can afford it.
Yeah.
Get it through other means or resources. If you're in low income and you can't afford it, there are programs out there to help. But therapy, a therapist has never sat me down and said, okay, this is what you're going to do. Yeah. You're going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, right? Mm-hmm. And then by G, you're going to be G is for great. And life is going to be wonderful. That's not how therapy works. Nope. And so for me, going to a therapist is they get you talk. They listen. They'll help probe a little bit, kind of like maybe steer in some direction if they detect an area that maybe you're overlooking or you hadn't thought about. Yep. And then it's through that conversation that you realize that what you're thinking up here doesn't compute the comes out.
Right.
Or maybe you now have a faulty assumption about yourself and you were a child that you put your whole life around and it's a lie. And you're like, oh, shit. And therapy brings about a lot of moments.
It does. You're right.
I recommend it to everybody.
So do I.
So yeah, the Trevor Project is a great project. NAMI is a great project. Son of Samaritan, the survivor of suicide loss grief group. You're involved in this as well,
I
correct?
know. Yes, here in Boston, it's called Safe Place, and it meets
They take
every other Wednesday. It meets the second and the last Wednesday of every month. It's virtual. You do not have to be in Boston. You can be anywhere in the world. You can join. The only thing that you have to do is just fill out a registration form ahead of time, because we do need to, to make sure that someone is coming in as an authentic suicide loss survivor, because it's not kind of a standard catch-all grief group. It's very specific to suicide loss. So that's kind of the one caveat, but it is absolutely free, and we meet over Zoom. I'm one of the facilitators, and it is just such a beautiful group. Sometimes it's small, it can be intimate. There can be a handful of people. Sometimes it can be a dozen or more people. People are unbelievably respectful and kind. People have incredible conversations. Like, as a facilitator, like, we're just really kind of putting the structure for the evening together. It's not 90 minutes, and you can come in and you can do nothing but just listen and be in a a virtual space where other people who have gone through what you're going through are there, and they're talking about their experience, and maybe something resonates with you. You feel like contributing, or maybe you don't. And there's no obligation to engage like that. It's entirely up to you. And it's just such an absolutely beautiful opportunity to be in a space with people who get it. It's like doing a walk. It's American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I volunteer with them and do some volunteer work with their walks, their overnight out of the darkness walks. And I know what it's like to just show up in a space, and all of a sudden you have all these people who have lost someone the way that you've lost someone, which is such a unique kind of loss. And I can't explain it. There's just, if you haven't been to one, it's so cathartic. It's
something profound about communal healing.
Yes.
And if you get to experience that in your life, if you get to put yourself in a situation where you're with others who are trying to heal from loss or pain that is similar to yours, it doesn't have to be the same, but similar, you will form bonds. You may never speak to that person again, but the bonds will have been formed.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful experience. Lisa, you've been wonderful to talk about. I can't believe it's been an hour already.
No.
It's gone by so quickly.
No.
The real place to visit for anybody listening is lisasugarman.com. I'm going to spell it out, and I'm going to also put it in the description. So it's LISASURGARMAN.com. So sugarman.com. Over there, literally a treasure trove of a lot of cool things. You can look up all of her columns and articles that she's written, which there are plenty. If you're someone who likes to read, go have a read. Now, on top of this, I want everyone to know that you have written 3 books.
I have.
Right. So I am really interested in this first one. No, that's not the one, because I don't have kids. How to raise perfectly imperfect kids and be okay with it. And I love that idea. Untying parent anxiety, so it's ages 5 to 8. 18 myths that have you in knots and how to get free. And then this is the one that I'm interested in purchasing myself. Life, it is what it is. It's one of my most common testing.
Yeah.
Because it really is what it is.
I know.
So go over there, purchase these books. In addition to that, I have noticed that you have been on approximately, due to my quick count, in 37 podcasts in 2024. It might be more.
I think it might be more. I think I'm getting close to the 50 mark. There's
a lot of podcasting.
A lot of podcasts. Yeah, I do.
I love that you're getting out there and telling your story.
That's the whole idea. That's it's the way that we change the narrative is at the grassroots level. Like the way you start a movement is at the grassroots level, and you talk, you have conversations, get in front of people, you have a dialogue, you share your story, you share your lived experience, and that's how people have mind shifts, and they change their belief systems, and that's what I'm trying to do. So I mean, look, I also have a YouTube channel, and on that channel I have something called the Suicide Survivor Series. And it's a series of, at this point now, there are well over 50 videos. I started it almost exactly a year ago. And they're designed to be just quick hits, 90 seconds. You will not find a video on there that is, I think, longer than 90 seconds. And it's really just a quick, from the heart and mind of a survivor, whether I'm talking about suicide loss or grief or loss or mental illness or mental wellness. I'm just like doing a quick 90-second brain dump. And those are videos that I think are super consumable because they're pretty much evergreen. They're always relevant, and they're very short, quick hits, and they're just designed to just like start the conversation, get people involved in the conversation.
So I'm going to note, I'm going to link that as well in the description.
Well, thank you.
And then on top of this, I mentioned this before, previously, but on LisaSugarman.com, there's a mental health resources page. Oh boy. Like, seriously, like your commitment to this cause gives me goosebumps. There's been a lot of coverage in diversity over here for toolkits and resources for people. And then you also have a toolkit page that you got grounding exercise, myths versus facts about grief, questions to ask someone who is struggling. It's immensely all in one place, y'all. So LisaSugarman.com is the place to go to find resources on suicide and dealing with grief and loss and suicide. Just you name it, it is there. Thank you so much for what you're doing. For everybody who is out there who's like me, who's like you, anybody who's listening, if you feel like hurting yourself, reach out. Just tell a friend, tell a family member, go see your doctor. Just tell someone.
If you're living in the United States and you're listening to this, call 988.
Yes, 988. So that's for anywhere in the continental U.S.?
Yes, anywhere in the continental U.S. And I also, in regard to my resources hub, you mentioned that it is quite diverse. I have 16 different categories, everything from the LGBTQ community to the BIPOC community, AAPI, veterans, the elderly, children, mindfulness, online health, mental health services. I also have resources in Canada, resources in Europe, and I have I think as many as I could find. There are probably about 150 on the list of all of the emergency response numbers around the world, in every country around the world, or at least about 150 of them. So just bookmark the number in your area. If you're in Canada, if you're listening to this in the US or out of the US, just find your country's emergency response number, that 988 number that is for mental health crisis, and just put it in your phone. Just create a contact, put it in your phone, tell the people you love, because if you yourself are struggling, that's what you want to call. And if you know someone who's struggling, you don't know what to do, that's what they're going to call. So that's the biggest takeaway for me.
I love that. And thank you for doing that work. And I hope that many people continue to benefit from it. Just reach out, girl. If you got it, reach out and tell somebody. For everyone else at home today, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Part My Noggin. This was a wonderful episode with Lisa Sugarman. If you want to watch her tell her story and other conversations, she also has a lot of her media links on her website, so you can go watch many conversations. I'm probably going to go watch some, but I find you quite fascinating and engaging. Thank you for being here, and until next time, everyone take care.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.